You're listening to the Sass podcast. I'm your host, Christy Rocha, also known as Sass. I identify as a woman, a wife, and a mother. That should tell you a lot already. And over the last few years, I've learned the value of talk therapy. I have seen how my inner work not only enhances my own well-being, but also my marriage, my parenting, my relationships. And in fact, you wouldn't be hearing this right now if it weren't for the work I've done. My mission is to debunk the misconceptions and stigmas around what therapy is and who it's for. Let's normalize working on our mental health and seeking help when needed. We've all heard of self-care, self-help, and self-love, but do you often wonder how to actually make it all happen? I do. You'll hear strategy-based conversations with professionals, as well as inspiring and validating stories from women who are just like you and me. Think of this podcast as the weekly therapy sessions you didn't know you needed, with a dash of sass, a lot of vulnerability, and me, relentlessly asking, but how? Hello. Welcome to the show. I have Arianna Bradford with me today. She is an ADHD productivity coach, writer, and speaker whose focus is helping people better understand their brains through productivity. After her own ADHD diagnosis in 2021, she's made it a point to ensure that those like her know that they are not alone and that their brains simply need to be worked with, not against. Arianna has regularly had work featured in Mabel and Moxie, HuffPost Parents, Today Parents, and Medium. Her book, Shame on You, Big Truths from a Bad Mom, has regularly gained accolades and positive attention from others in her field. Today, she lives in Costa Rica with her husband and 2 children. Okay, so Arianna takes me through the story of ADHD pretty much in her household, from her son's diagnosis to her own. We talk about the ADHD moment that is going on social media right now, how the ADHD brain works, and the strategies and mindset shifts she's implemented in her own life and the lives of her clients. We're going to get to her in just a second, but I just want to remind you that I'm regularly getting video clips of each episode, including this one, up on my YouTube channel. And if you're wondering why you would care to look at that, well, I just think it's fun to actually see me and the guest interacting. You can get a more well-rounded sense of our conversation when you see us going back and forth and kind of feel like you're there with us. So just try it. If you don't like it, you don't have to keep watching. Anyway, all right. As always, stay tuned after for my final thoughts. Here's Arianna. Hey, Arianna. So nice to meet you. Thank you for being here with me today.
Thank you for having me today. I am glad to be here.
I read that you were diagnosed with ADHD in 2021, which is not that long ago. If you don't mind sharing, how old would that have made you, and what were your symptoms and prompted you to seek a diagnosis, or how did that work? Tell your story.
Because I was about to say, this is such a long story.
That's okay. That's what I want to know.
So I was 35.
Okay.
I am 36 now. And for me, it was actually kind of like a long journey where I really kind of had to be pushed by life into finally getting tested. I didn't even really start thinking that something was up until my son was 5 years old. So I was maybe 32. Mm-hmm. And we had always kind of had a feeling with him that he did. Even not knowing anything about ADHD at the time, even with as little as we knew, we were like, we think he might have ADHD. But when you look up the symptoms of ADHD, it looks like regular kid stuff, right? Yeah. You know, like what kid isn't going to be daydreaming, or what kid isn't going to be running all over the place? Like these are things you want to see your 3-year-old doing, right? So we were like, well, we're just going to wait. We'll sit back, we'll watch how this goes, and we'll try to see what comes of it. And we wound up kind of having to move a little faster than expected. When he was 5 years old, he was in school and he started having problems in school. my son is a very bright boy, but we noticed that he was having a lot of issues with his interpersonal relationships with other people. And it wasn't necessarily that he didn't get along with people. He gets along with people very well, but he struggles with impulse control. And he was getting in a lot of trouble for, putting his hands on kids who didn't want to be touched and things like that. And I'll never forget the day that I started noticing something was up. We had to have yet another talk with him. My husband is trying to talk to him, and my son is just not sitting still. Like, he's just all over the place. You can tell his eyes are just like everywhere. And my husband was getting frustrated, but suddenly it hit me. I thought, no kid that goes through something like this, if they have any sort of survival instinct, which, most kids don't, but they have something, would not want to upset their father any further. And he would try to sit still if he could. I don't think he can sit still. So at that point, I was like, we've been kind of watching him for ADHD anyway. Let me go ahead and look into it. As I'm doing the research for my son, I start feeling like the internet's making fun of me, because literally everything I'm finding is also describing me. I am not what they would call the hyperactive type. I'm inattentive. But at the same time, a lot of the things that they were bringing up for adulthood very much matched me. For example, there were things like impulsive spending that I did not know was an ADHD thing. A tendency to lose things, bad short-term memory, just things like that, where I was going, this all really sounds a lot like me. But even with knowing that, we got my son diagnosed, but I was like, but it's not messing up my life. I'm fine. Which was a lie, by the way. Anybody out there who's listening to this is like, oh, so it was totally messing with my life. It was messing with my relationship with my husband. It was messing with a lot of things, because, there, especially when it came to like taking care of the house, like housekeeping and things like that. My husband would ask me to do something. It would be something that I did not feel like doing, and I could not make my body do it. And so, to him, it looked like broken promises. To me, it was frustrating, because I'm like, how can I get across to you that I'm doing everything I can? I just can't seem to move. But I didn't know that that was an ADHD thing. I didn't know that that was what executive dysfunction was. So to me, it was just, I'm lazy. It's just that I'm lazy, right? I'm lazy, I'm low energy, blah, blah, blah. So the final thing that pushed me to get diagnosed was fatigue. I was getting tired all the time. And I was so frustrated, because it just felt like that was my default. My default was tired. And I was like, I'm just going to Google this one more time, because I had doctors testing my thyroid. I had all this other stuff, and like nothing was really coming up to explain why I was so tired all the time. And an article came up that said, your ADHD could be making you tired. And at this point, this was like the 4th or 5th time that I had found something that had been like, oh, hey, I do that. And then it's like ADHD is in the title. And I'm like, so at that point, I was like, all right, I'm taking this as a sign. I need to go get checked. And I went and got checked, and it was a really simple process. I didn't even need to get a referral. I just kind of Googled places that had people who evaluated for it, found a person who evaluated for it, went to her office. I didn't even go to her office, actually. I telehealthed in, like I did a video thing. She went ahead, she asked me a bunch of questions that are on the regular evaluation form. I answered them. And yeah, by the time I was done, she was like, okay, you've got moderate inattentive. Do you want medication? I said, yeah. She hooked me up with a psychiatrist, and I was seeing her and a psychiatrist within a week. So,
wow. Yeah. Okay. So, so many places I want to go there.
It's got a lot of spots to go, a lot of places to branch.
It does, because you know what? I have a son, and that's the first thing that came to mind. Is I have a son who recently, he's 2.5, he'll be 3 in February. We're having trouble with him using his hands. And I can appreciate how difficult it is to decipher from developmental behavior, childlike behavior, because they are children, and something that you can go get a diagnosis for, get help for. And not that you can't get help for normal, like quote unquote, normal childhood behavior, but it's hard, because as you're talking, I'm thinking about times when, it's hard to, it is hard to get him to sit still, but he's 2.5. It's like,
Yeah. And so, yeah, it's very hard to tell.
it's
It's very
hard.
hard. And the only thing that I can say there is anybody who's going through that, I went through that, and most doctors aren't really going to do the diagnosis that young anyway.
Okay.
I think the only reason why we got one as young as we did was because he was having issues at school, and I had kind of made it clear he's struggling. That's why we're doing this.
Okay.
And the chances are, like, really, like you said, at 3, 2.5, like, hitting and not sitting still and stuff like that is so common.
Yeah.
I can't even really honestly tell you what it was with our son. I
Yeah.
can't. I just feel like there was something about it that was really just
You
setting
just
off
had
alarm
like
bells for us.
a gut
Yeah.
instinct about
Yeah.
it.
It wasn't like necessary. Actually, he wasn't much of a hitter when he
Mhm.
was that age. He wasn't much of a hitter. He really, he didn't really hit or anything like that. For him, like I said, I can't really put a finger on it. It was just something about his behavior that felt very beyond his control.
Mhm.
And once
Okay.
we realized that, we were like, we'll watch this, but it feels like this may not be fully him controlling every single aspect of his behavior. So,
Okay.
no.
Okay. And then for you, within a week, working with someone and getting on medication, how quickly did you start to notice a difference in your life and your what changed? Was it behavioral? Was it thought patterns? Like, what does the medication actually do?
So the medication, and keep in mind, I am not a doctor or a scientist, so this is completely going off of what I understand. The medication, generally, when you are given ADHD medication, you are given a stimulant, and the stimulant's job is to help your body. And I know that this isn't just it, and I know that I'm simplifying it, but a big part of why people with ADHD struggle is that our pleasure centers, where our reward centers, where we tend to feel a lot of that dopamine fix, that dopamine rush, we don't really have that. And so what the stimulants tend to do is they tend to help in producing that dopamine that we would need to move. And
Interesting. Okay.
for most of us, okay, I don't want to say that I speak for every single ADHD person out there, but I will say that I've spoken to a lot of other ADHDers, and this seems to track. The difference between us taking it and somebody taking it who does not have ADHD is it just makes us feel normal.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, when I first took my medication, they always do what's called titrating a dose. So they tend to give you the lowest dose possible first, because they want to see if you can handle it. And they also want to see maybe if that lowest dose is enough.
Right.
And I at first was like, nothing's happening, because in my mind I thought, oh, this medication is going to make me like energetic and I'm going to be all over the place. And I felt so normal that I was like, nothing's happening, nothing's changed. I don't like, this stuff's not working.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until I realized that I had thought to put the dishes away, and I got up to put the dishes away, and I had thought, to go make lunch. And I got up and I made lunch, that I started to realize, oh, it is changing something. It's just not changing me in the way that I want it to, right?
Yeah.
And I still have the post somewhere, because I posted on Facebook because I needed to put it somewhere. The second day that I was on medication, I cried. And I cried because I had the energy throughout the day to take my kids to the library and still come back and do some of the house chores I wanted to do. And it was my night to make dinner, and I had the energy to make dinner. I was doing everything that my brain wanted to do without having to force myself or push myself. And it was an amazing feeling. Now, that being said, if anybody is listening to this and they're like, well, I know what I'm doing after I finish listening to this episode, a word of warning: you will never, never, never feel the same way that you do that first week. You will always be like, why can't I feel that way? And it's because your brain adjusts. It adapts. And once it adjusts, that same medication, it's still going to work. Right. Okay. I'm upfront right now, I actually am not medicated on ADHD medication anymore. I'm actually managing mine differently. But when I was on medication, it worked. It was fine. It worked great. It was just, I never really had that same euphoric, I have so much energy, I could do everything type feeling. It was more of that first day normal, okay, I'm thinking of doing something and now I can force myself to get up to go do it, even if I don't want to do it type thing.
Yeah.
So it doesn't, yeah, that's one of the things that I also try to warn people when I work with them is that ADHD medication is not a fix-all. It's going to make it so that you and your brain work a little bit more in harmony, usually, but it's not going to give you everything that you need to be able to actually use that harmony the right way.
Right. Okay. So there are a lot of people out there that have ADHD and get help for it, but not all of them become a coach and make this their life work for the
This
time
is true.
being.
This
Right.
is
So
very true. For the time being, yeah,
for the
with
time
ADHD, you just never know. But
well, and I didn't mean it like that. I just meant who knows
I
what else
mean,
you have planned for your
I don't
life.
see this, you know, unless something happens that's like really big where I just can't take clients anymore. Like I don't see myself going anywhere. But
Okay.
yeah.
So why do that? Why make this your work?
Um, you know, I was thinking about that the other day, actually. It's really funny you asked. And it's like I've kind of always been in this weird vein of like, I want to be the person who helps you feel less alone. Before I even started doing this, like when I first started like kind of showing up more publicly, I actually spoke to parents mostly, and it came from a place of you know, I was a musician. I'm tatted up. I would have more tattoos if I could. I'm a writer, I'm an artist, I'm a number of different things, and yet once I had kids, it was like none of that mattered anymore. People really were just more interested in the fact that I had children, and they thought that they knew me immediately. And the more that I started kind of doing this, like look into other parents, the more I started kind of sharing my stuff, because it was like, I don't see anybody out here talking about the fact that sometimes you don't want your kids to hug you. Like, it's not that you don't like them. It's not that you're denying them affection. It's just that the way that you want to show affection in that moment is not physical. I didn't see that. And so I started talking about those things. And obviously, yes, I got some blowback, but I also had a bunch of people coming out of the woodwork like, oh my God, thank you. I was starting to think I was a monster, because, and it's like, you know, you start hearing these things and you're like, man, that's a lonely way to be.
Yeah.
And social media can often be used for the wrong reasons. And I feel like one of the right reasons it exists is to connect people who feel like they're the only ones going through something. So that was my original way of doing things. And then that kind of fell out after 2020 and a bunch of other things that kind of went down. There was a lot of very personal stuff that occurred. And the thing that really hit me after my ADHD diagnosis was that the thing that finally pushed me, that really finally pushed me, like I wanted to go, but the thing that took away a lot of that fear for me was finding people online talking about their diagnoses. And I was like, I want to do this for other people. But I also have always really liked, kind of a nerd about this kind of thing, organization and productivity, and coming up with ways to get things done without feeling like you have to get everything done. And so, you know, I was like, well, if I am going to pay this forward, if I'm going to do this, I also want to try to like help people hands-on if I can. Like, yeah, I can speak and that's great and whatever.
Right.
And I'm always down to like talk about this kind of stuff. But there are people out there who legitimately just need somebody to help them look at the way that they judge themselves according to the definition of productivity that is set by a society not set up for them. And that also, you know, they just need somebody to say, hey, this thing that you're having a problem with, it's just because your brain works a certain way and this is how to work with it. And I always tell my clients every time I talk to them, I'm like, I like you, but my goal is to get to the point where you don't need me anymore. That's my goal. So it's more, it just really became more about wanting to do for other people what others did for me, with the added bonus of feeling like, you know, I'm showing people there's nothing bad about your brain. You don't have to change it. You don't have to get rid of it. You just have to learn how to work with it. It's the only brain you got. So that was basically where that came from, was just wanting to do that for people, wanting people to kind of understand that, like, I know what it feels like to grow up ashamed of the brain that you have, and to constantly be told that the brain that you have is wrong or bad or lazy. And I kind of wanted to do my part to change that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And speaking of social media,
Mm-hmm.
I feel that ADHD is kind of having a social media moment.
It
Like
really is. Yeah.
everyone seems to be, not everyone, you know what I mean?
A
Like
lot of
a
people. Yeah.
lot of people are talking about it. I feel like there's a lot of self-diagnosing going on. There's
Yes.
a lot of, I can imagine, possibly misinformation going out there about it.
Mhm.
What are you seeing online that maybe pertains to some myths about ADHD that you want to clear up, or what's your perception of what's going on online with ADHD right now?
So, I'm kind of in the middle on this one. On one hand, I love the fact that we have information available to us in a way that even when I was growing up, okay, and that's going to make me sound super old, but I was a teenager before we were able to even like search on Netscape for
Right.
things. Okay. I don't even know if
Right.
anybody remembers Netscape or Ask Jeeves, but that was where you went for things.
Yeah.
But when you first started out, you had to do like the Encyclopedia Britannica or like go to the library or whatever. So I think it's incredible that now if someone is sitting in their home and they're like, I really want to know about attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, but I don't want to have to go ask anybody. I would really just like to read about it. I love that that's available. I love that you can connect with people.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, I do feel that it has given people a false sense of knowledge. Because I do feel that there are a lot of people out there who believe that because they were able to look it up and read it, and they assume that they understood it, that they don't need to talk to anybody who actually made it their life's work or made it their focus to study.
Right.
Even with me, like I will make it very clear, I have done a lot of reading and a lot of work with this and everything. I am still not a doctor or a therapist.
Right.
And for certain things, I'm going to tell people outright, you don't want to talk to me. You want to talk to somebody who actually went to school to do this. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm going to be doing more of the like hands-on practical stuff. But when you want to start asking me about scientific stuff or cognitive behavioral stuff, things like that, that's not my focus. But some people, unfortunately, get a very, and I hate using the word undeserved, it just feels so sharp, but they do have this belief that, well, I saw it on TikTok and I watched like 3 hours of TikTok and now I know ADHD. And it's like, no, you don't. No, you don't. And here's the thing. There is a lot of misinformation out there. For example, the fact that you have a hard time focusing is not necessarily a sign of ADHD. It's not. A sign of ADHD, there are a lot of things that could be a sign of ADHD, but they also could not be.
Right.
If you're having a hard time focusing, okay, we all have a hard time focusing.
Are you
sometimes,
tired?
right?
Are you hungry?
Exactly. And there are other ADHDers who hate that because we will say, I lose things all the time. And someone will go, well, we all lose things all the time. True, but you don't put something down 5 seconds later, you forget where you put it. And this doesn't happen to you literally on a chronic basis. There's a difference, right? So it goes the other way. Well, I'm easily distracted. Okay. That could just be a personal trait. It doesn't have to be ADHD. There's a lot of stuff that plays into this. And it's a very hot button topic in the community as to whether or not self-diagnoses are quote unquote valid. And my personal feeling is that I don't believe that it hurts anyone if you suspect that you have ADHD to treat yourself as if you have ADHD. I would not take medication unless you have finally found out that you do, because like I said, that kind of thing can turn disastrous if you don't know for sure. But I think that, if you suspect that you have it and you don't want to spend all of the money that it takes to go to a doctor and you would rather just treat yourself the way that people with ADHD treat themselves to see if that helps, I say more power to you. It's not hurting me. It's not hurting other ADHDers. If anything, the worst that's going to happen is you're going to find that doesn't work, and then you're going to try to figure something else out for yourself. I don't think that in itself is a problem. What I do think is a problem is when people try to take this information that they have gleaned just from the internet, and they try to use this against others. Like when they tend to be like, well, you're just rude to people who have ADHD. And it's like, okay, but do you? Like, you can't really just like take this like you're a card carrying member of some club and start throwing it in people's faces to try to get the same so-called benefits that we do. You know, that's also disrespectful. So all of that to say, I think that it's kind of a double-edged sword. I, for example, would not have learned about myself had I not had social media, and I would not have taught the people that I've taught without social media. But I do think that you have to be very careful with how sure you are about the things that you say, especially if you did not go to school or that you did not spend long hours reading up on this stuff.
Right.
There is a difference.
Yeah, I interviewed Amanda Petrik-Gardner recently, and she's an OCD specialist on TikTok, and she talks a lot about this. And, you know, she said her point that she made about social media and mental health and mental illnesses and disorders and all the things was, anyone kind of talking about her, like I said, her example is OCD. She's like, anyone talking about OCD as like something to be glamorized probably doesn't have it. She's like, because no one wants it.
Nobody
does. Right. And I can imagine it's not that there aren't any, anything having to do with ADHD that doesn't, it's not that there aren't any positives that can come from it, right? Like I know there are people who can be very creative because of it. And there's so many, this isn't to say this is like, it's just a terrible thing to have. It's just, I don't think anyone would choose it just because the world is so set up against
set up
you
for people who don't have it. And
right. So it's like, it's just
and what I would add to that, I think that's true. See, here's the thing. I actually deal a lot in humor. Okay. I cover a lot of things with humor, and sometimes it's actually gotten me in trouble. But my point being, sometimes we deal with things with humor, and that's okay. What becomes a problem is when we start trying to play it up like we are any better for having it. It's really honestly,
yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, well, because then you're downplaying the very real problems and the very real struggles that people do have with it. And I'm not saying that, that makes us less than. I don't like when people act like they're any better because they don't have ADHD.
Right. Like we all have something on it.
Yeah, we all have something. Yeah. So it's really not great for you to be pretending that you're any better either. Right. But at the same time, I feel like there is a disrespect there to the actual, because I have OCD as well. It's actually quite common to have ADHD and OCD. And, when you are dealing with obtrusive thoughts, or when you can't stop doing the same thing over and over and over again, there is something disrespectful about people acting like, oh, you wish you had obsessive compulsive disorder. It's like, I don't actually, like, honestly, if I could deprogram my brain so that I could not obsess over things that I really don't want to be obsessing over when I'm stressed, be great. So it's a fine line. It's a fine line. And what I will say is, most of the time when I am seeing the things where it's like, oh, you're glamorizing this, they're generally young. And so I try not to take offense, because if we had TikTok when I was 15, nobody would like me. Okay. Because half of the stuff that I did in my room where nobody could see it, thank whatever you want to call it. Yeah. If somebody had been in that room with me with a camera, like taping half of the stuff that I thought that I was doing that was cool, oh my God, I would be like living out here not talking to anybody. Because they'd be like, oh, you're the girl who, So I try to take those kids with a grain of salt, because especially when you're at that age, you want to be special, right? And you're trying to understand yourself. And to be fair, some of these kids probably are neurodivergent in some way or another, and they just don't quite understand how. And TikTok is where they go for comfort. And maybe could some of their stuff be put a little better? Sure. But
No.
they're young.
Yeah. Yeah. And I appreciate that because you're right. And, you know, I think the same can be said with ADHD as it was with OCD, where it is the harmful phrases are like, oh, I was so OCD about my kitchen this morning. I had to
Yeah.
this and that. And like, I'm
Mhm.
sure a lot of the same can be said with
For ADHD.
ADHD.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh no, I left my purse in the car. There goes my ADHD. And it's like,
Right. Right. And it's like, if,
it's like you remembered your purse. Okay.
right.
You remembered to bring it. It's
Right.
in the car, but you remembered to bring it. And I do want to make it clear here though, that I'm not gatekeeping, because I do think that there are some people out there, for example, who I love lists. Lists are like, if I didn't live according to a list, I wouldn't be able to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some people out there who are like, I can't do lists. That's fine. Like, that doesn't make you any less ADHD. It doesn't invalidate your diagnosis. It's
Right.
just, but I do think that, you know, when you have people who don't have ADHD, they do tend to apply it to things where it's like, and they'll be like, yeah, I tie my shoes in double knots. I must have ADHD. And it's like,
Yeah.
that's not, no, that's a personality quirk. That's not ADHD.
It's a choice versus not a choice, right?
Exactly.
It's a choice versus not a choice, or it's like the choice based on a legitimate fear or concern for a different
Yes.
outcome, right?
People do
Like,
forget that it's okay. Like depression too. People sometimes forget you have every right to be depressed. You
right.
know, they'll be like, oh gosh, I'm depressed and I don't know why. And it's like, you know, you start asking them about what's going on in their lives and it's like someone died.
Right.
And you know, they haven't been on top of their bills and they're like, and it's like, you don't forget that you have every right to sometimes be distracted,
Yeah.
to be depressed, you know, to feel very particular about certain things. You have the right to feel those things without having a disorder.
Yeah.
It's totally and completely okay to be that way. That's human.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so what does it actually look like on a kind of more tangible, actionable level to work with you? Like, what are you actually doing with your clients?
Um, essentially, no, I'm sorry. It's just like I had the thought of the scene from Office Space where they're like, "So what exactly do you do here?" I was
Did you
like,
get
"Oh,
the memo?
I was like, hmm." But no. So, with me, essentially, you know, I meet with people virtually. That's again one of the lovely things about living in this day and age. And what we do is we talk about what's bothering them, and essentially, it always comes down to the same few things. It's always like, I'm doing really well at work, but my life is just a mess. I am constantly feeling like things are getting delivered on time, but by the skin of my teeth. I am, you know, I'm sleeping fine, but I'm just having the hardest time figuring out what to do with my brain during the day, things like that. And what we wind up doing is we wind up kind of little by little chipping away at those things. It's not something that can go away right away. And ADHDers are the worst at not accepting things that do not give them immediate satisfaction, me included. But it is a thing that takes time because, you know, you have to, and I remind them of this all the time. You have to remember that we live in a society that was not built for brains that can't just focus on one thing at a time and just move in a linear fashion. So what we wind up doing is kind of figuring out how their day should be built, how their day should be, how their time should be meted out. And we try to keep it in the beginning very general. And then eventually we start trying to work things into their day, try to work in a chance for them to work on what they really want to. Because a lot of us, what we do is we also feel like, oh, well, part of the reason we do so well at work, okay, by and large, 99.9% of the time, the ADHDers that I work with do really well at work and they have no problems at work. But the reasoning for that is that work gives them the urgency and the deadlines for them to move. So they know I have to have this thing done by Tuesday. I have to have this thing done by Wednesday. I have to get to this meeting at 11, right? They have no choice. There's no chance for their brains to wander to another option. So they do really well at work. But because they put all of that mental focus on doing well at work, when it comes to doing things at home, they struggle. and they don't feel quite as ready to do things. So little by little, we start working in, okay, what do you want to focus on at home? What kind of things do you like to do that actually give you joy? Not, I sit down and I watch something on Netflix and I zone out. It's like, what do you do that actually brings you back to yourself? What centers you? We're going to make time for that. We're going to make time for you to not do anything. We're going to work out what you can do during the times where you have a little bit of extra time, but you don't really know what to do with it. We slowly start helping them figure out what a day should look like for their brains. And over time, we also start really kind of knocking down the beliefs that they have been given over time about what productivity should look like. Because a lot of us, we believe, well, productivity is getting everything on my to-do list done in one day. And not only is that unfair for everybody, but especially for ADHDers, that's very unfair. And so we kind of start, talking about that and working out how to break those things into pieces instead of trying to do them all at once. So I guide them towards the tools, and then I give the accountability. But most of the time, and I say this to them all the time, they're the ones who do the work. I'm just the one who tells them, this is what the work should be. And then I try to be there for them every week to say, okay, hey, like, how's it been going? Do we need to adjust? Here's how we adjust. And then we move forward.
Okay. So a couple of things. Do you have any ideas? I'm really going to put you on the spot here. So if you don't have an answer, that's okay.
Okay.
But it's not that intense. Do you have any, it's a big question, is what I mean. Do you have any ideas as to how it would be possible to alter what is the norm, that linear path of doing things, to accommodate, all different types of brains and how they function? Like, I ask because it's like, right, like we see the issues happening now in schools, in corporate offices, in just every system that we have in culture is set up for that linear path of things that really does not work for everyone. And but where I understand, aside from all the patriarchal crap of why that was set up that way,
Right.
there does need to be some way to organize
Of
these
course.
huge systems. So,
Of
like,
course.
do you have any ideas on how, if you could wave a magic wand, like what you would want to see? Just maybe take schools or corporate, like take one facet of it and be like, how do you think some part in the distant future, or wave that magic wand, could we better accommodate kids, adults who work and learn differently?
So, I feel like some of it would not be able to change, right? Like, we need deadlines. Deadlines have to happen. We have to be able to say, like, yeah, I'm going to give you this by Friday, and give it by Friday. That's just that's natural. There's no way of getting around that, right? I feel like it really is something that has to come with more education. That there has to be, when we're talking workplaces and schools, like schools kind of have it right with IEPs and 541. I think it's called 541s. I don't know. My mom's gonna yell at me because she works in that all the time, and she'd be like, "Are you serious?" But we have plans, like we have action plans for kids and things like that. But
that's if it's caught, though.
That's if it's caught, and that's why I was going to say, it would really just be great. I have a working theory myself that ADHD will eventually no longer be considered a disorder, that it's going to eventually be considered just one type of brain type, like when we say right-brained or left-brained, and we're going to consider ADHD, instead of a disorder, some brain type, because so many people are finding out that they have it, and it's like the numbers are spiking so fast that it just honestly suggests that there's just this group of kids that went to school that just thought differently, and we didn't allow for that. And I feel like the only way that that's going to change is when that becomes obvious, when it becomes obvious that it's like, oh, this isn't a disorder. This isn't something where we need to be, calling in doctors. This is just where we need to start adjusting the way that we handle our curriculum, that there's a way we need to change the way that we do things so that, maybe we are not only marrying the way that we do things now, but we're trying to make sure that we add in some extra things that speak to kids who might learn in this particular manner, right? And when it comes to adults, I truly, truly believe, and I'm going to tell a tiny story here because I want to explain where this is coming from. So I'm a creative, like that's the way that it is. I feel my best when I'm making things, anything. Okay. When I'm making things and when I'm learning. So I have to be doing something new. And for the longest time, I would drive my friends crazy because I'd be like, I think I want to be a cop. And then I'm like, never mind, I want to be a lawyer. And I'm like, never mind, I want to be a vet. And then they were just like, oh my God, please pick something, anything. I don't care what it is. Be a rodeo clown. Just pick something because you're driving us insane. And so I started feeling like, wow, they're right. Like I need to pick something. And throughout my life, I have sold insurance. I've been an insurance claims adjuster. I've been a teacher. I was actually in school to become a high school English teacher. I went to grad school to do advertising, to be creative in advertising. And that's just like a few things without me actually having to go through my entire CV.
Right.
And, what it really came down to was that I was feeling this pressure to be a person that I am not. Society very much favors the people who move in that linear fashion, but there are some of us who don't work that way. And maybe we have a job, right, where we only focus on one thing, but we still have multiple interests, or the term that's very popular right now is multi-passionate. Or multi-passionate. Like, yeah, okay, maybe I do TPS reports during the day, but I love painting.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's a very capitalist attitude out there that if it's not making you money, if it's not lining your pockets, what are you wasting your time doing? Why are you painting after work when you could be washing clothes so that you could get to work the next day? Or why aren't you making dinner? Why aren't you doing this? Why? So you suddenly start feeling like, I love painting. I love doing this. I love doing that. But what good is my happiness? Why is that worth making time for? And that also leads to, I think, I personally believe, a lot of depression in people with ADHD, because a lot of us are multi-passionate. A lot of us are people who we like chasing those shiny things, right? Like when I first started, I was very much like, oh, shiny object syndrome, we have to ignore that. And thanks to a very good friend of mine and my own life experiences, I have come to realize that some of us need shiny object syndrome. That's how we keep things interesting. Yeah. Like, as long as it's not ruining your pockets and as long as it's not taking away time from things that you really, really care about, like family or your health or whatever.
Casual things. Yeah.
Casual things. Yeah. Like, as long as it's not doing that, there is no shame in being like, I have a podcast. I like to write. I like to do this. I like to do that. And not doing those things every day. I'm writing a book. When was the last time you wrote it? I don't know, 6 months ago. I haven't felt like doing it. Doesn't mean that it's not a valid hobby.
Yeah.
But we are consistently taught, if it's not linear, if it's not every day, if it's not making you money, it's not worth it. And ADHD brains don't work that way. We don't like linear. We don't like having to pick just one thing. We don't like being able to not look into things that interest us. That's why a very high number of us actually get into a hobby, start that hobby, decide to make that hobby a job, wind up hating it and dropping it. Right. Because we didn't want it to be a job in the first place. We just really liked, sewing silly dolls. But then people were like, you should do this for a living.
Right.
And we were like, oh yeah, that's right. I guess it's really not worth anything unless I'm making money. Yeah. But we didn't want to do that to begin with. It was something we were doing for ourselves. That was one of the 14,000 things that we found interesting that we wanted to do. Every interest does not have to give us money. Every interest does not have to be for other people. And honestly, until we start changing our attitude towards that, there's not really going to be much of a change for ADHD adults either.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just want to make the clarification that, because I think that you're absolutely right. I think that anyone who has a hobby, so there's a way now to market and sell whatever that hobby is. Absolutely. There's an Etsy shop, but there's an Instagram influencer. There's all these things. And I think most of us feel that. I want to clarify though, that a big difference in what you're saying is that for you and for your experience working with so many other ADHDers, it's that those hobbies and interests change and vary on such a wide range of topics as opposed to like like I can think of like 4 or 5 things I'm interested in and they've
Mhm.
been pretty consistent.
Yeah.
Like they, I've grown as a person, I've changed, I've
Mhm.
aged, but I don't find myself I want to do this today and that tomorrow.
So
And so I just want to get the a little bit
yeah,
of the
so
clarification.
yes and no. I feel like part of the reason why we wind up hobby hopping so much is because we almost always try to make them into businesses. Because
Ah,
people
okay.
because people make us feel like you can't just be doing this because you like it.
Yeah.
And what happens is, I feel like for anybody, if you have something that you love to do, but then suddenly you have other people telling you how to do it, you're very quickly going to fall out of love with that hobby.
Yeah.
And I do feel that we have very varied hobbies. I do feel like, I could list right now like 4 different things that I am doing.
Mhm.
Um, but they haven't really changed. I've always loved doing like
Okay.
radio type podcast type things. I've always loved writing. I've always loved music. I've always loved art. None of that stuff has ever changed.
Mhm.
It's just that one thing, and I noticed that I fell into it myself, was always being like, wow, I really like this hobby. I should get paid for it.
Mm.
And of course, that came from the attitude that I was surrounded with of, well, if you're spending your time doing it
Right.
and if you're spending money on it,
Right.
then you must want to make money from it.
Right. Right. Okay. All right. What what centers you when you're going about your day, when you're seeing clients and you need to sort of regroup? How do you do that?
Um, it depends on where I'm at. Like, for example, right now, I am in the midst of working on becoming an herbalist.
Oh.
So for me, learning about herbs and plants and medicine is like I love it. I really do. Unless my brain is just dead at the end of the day, then sometimes I can't, but I feel like I'm really within myself and being real to myself when
Mhm.
I am sitting and I'm learning about plant medicine.
Mhm.
Um but if my brain is just dead and I'm just like, I really, honest to God, don't feel like talking about calendula right now, then essentially what I tend to do instead is I tend to just any sort of creating or planning for creating. If I have, and I've said this before, like on my short-lived TikTok, because I wound up not liking TikTok because I was being told how to do TikTok. But when I was on TikTok, I actually was telling creatives with ADHD, I was like, you need a passion project. It's something like anything. Like it really doesn't, it has to be something that has multiple steps that you can plan to do over time, that you get to think about when your brain is kind of dead, but you want to think about something, and you can do little things towards it all the time. And so that's essentially what I try to do, is I try to have some sort of passion project in place.
Okay.
Like for me, it's I'm weird, so I really like to plan like events and things like that that are actually quite stressful. But that's my thing, is I like to sit there and be like, how would I do this, and what would I? But sometimes it's writing, sometimes it's painting, drawing, but it's generally something that is going to be more on the creative side, so it allows me to exercise that side of my brain a little bit more.
Okay. Okay. And as someone who has a pretty significant, social media, I know you don't, you got not on TikTok anymore, but your
Mhm.
Instagram is active and you've got a great following there and community. A co- a a conversation that I have on my show a lot is about mental health for content creators.
Mhm.
Do you have any advice or tips for content creators listening who have ADHD and maybe are like, how am I supposed to stick with this long enough to build a community? Or what are some challenges maybe that you face with social media that you would help someone through? Like, I don't know. My question is vague because I
No,
don't
I
know what
see
I'm
what you're
asking
saying.
necessarily, but
No, no, I see what you're saying,
like
and
help your fellow content
help
creator.
help us, help me, help you. No, so I can only tell you what I've been struggling with,
Okay.
and I can tell you what my answer is, and
Okay.
it's going to become even more obvious for those who are following me starting Monday. Um, So we have been talking this whole time about what I like to call, personal segregation. You could also call it compartmentalization, right? Where basically you are supposed to pick one part of yourself and honor that part, and the rest of it, if it has to be thrown by the wayside, it's thrown by the wayside. And social media is hammered into you to be that way as well, right? Talk about one thing or two things and break down what you are in your bio to one or two adjectives and make sure that everybody who follows you knows exactly what they're dealing with. Otherwise, you lose an audience.
Yeah.
I was struggling with that real hard. And recently I realized that the answer to this is integration. So if you are out there and you make social media content and you're like, yeah, but every single time, I sell socks. So every time that I post something, it has to be about, socks or me making the socks or people wearing the socks. But I'm also really, really into, art. And I would really love to show off my art. Show off your art. Show off your art. Okay. Because for ADHDers, my true belief is that your product is not your product. You are your product. They are going to buy from you. You have such a varied and different personality with so many varied and different interests that you actually are sitting on a mountain of content.
Yeah.
It's just that you feel as if that content is not relevant because you've been told that if you're talking about socks, you got to talk about socks. But in your case, talk about the person behind the socks. Share the stuff that you're into. You're really into drawing, man, go ahead and post some like time-lapse videos of you drawing then. Post photos of the things that you've done. You sell a painting, tell people you sold a painting. Don't feel like you got to hold that part of yourself back just because people want to hear about socks. Okay. And that's basically what I came to, is I realized, you know what? I love helping people with ADHD. I really do. I love it. I love being able to learn about it and teach people about it and figure out things that other people aren't talking about. I love that part. But that's only part of me. I also love herbalism and I want to talk about herbs. Okay. I want to tell people what I have figured out about dandelions, for example. I want to talk about dandelions sometimes, guys. I love playing video games and I would really love to be able to just sometimes go online and stream and play video games and swear, and people get to watch me swear and play video games all they want, or nobody does, but I get to do it anyway. Right. I have a podcast where I talk about like movies and stuff like that. And sometimes I want to talk about that. I'm talking about that stuff. I'm going to talk about that stuff now. I'm going to share that stuff with the people who are following me. And does that mean that some people who only showed up to learn about ADHD are going to peace out? Yeah, probably. But also the people who are like, this person has ADHD, but she has varied interests and she seems like she's getting to do them all and she's really enjoying them. And she seems like she's happy. Hopefully that is going to do exactly what I came here to do in the first place, which is push that person to do the same thing for themselves. And if they want help, they can come find me because obviously I know how to do the things that I enjoy and still have ADHD. Yeah. So yeah, anybody who's listening to this, if you're like, what do I do? Figure out what it is that you really want to talk about and add that, share it. You are the person that they are buying into. They are buying into you, not what you're selling.
Yeah. That's amazing advice. And you said it very well. And it's funny because now kind of full circle with this conversation, right? It's really niching down on social media is like the anti-ADHD way.
It's anti-ADHD. It's not
it's
ADHD
not very on brand
at all. At all. It's just so not, it's not ADHD friendly in the least. And that's part of the reason that things like TikTok didn't appeal to me, because I was like, ADHDers are not known for being not long-winded, and you want me to post about basically the same thing for only a minute at a time 3 times a day. Can't do it.
Yeah.
No thanks.
Yeah. So. Okay. And I have just another minute or two with you here, and I hesitate to bring it up because I think what I relate to in what you said, I'm like coming at it backwards because when you mention all of your interests, right? Like you're an artist, a painter, all these things, creative type, and that initial feeling back when you became a mom of all of a sudden, like that was the only piece of you that seemed to matter.
Mm-hmm.
And I say I hesitate to bring it up because now I'm highlighting it and I'm like, you
No,
know what I mean?
I mean, I am still a mom. It is
No, I
still part of
know,
life.
but
It's fine.
I bring it up because I relate to that so much. And I
Yeah.
think that so often, we're shamed for that.
Yep.
And I don't know, I just I'm recently just like grappling with I love my kids, but they're not enough.
No, they're
And
not supposed to be. They're not
yeah,
supposed to be. I'm kind of going back in time now. I used to talk about this all the time. But listen, anybody out there who is a parent, your kids are your world. They're not your universe. That is that you are not supposed to just be living your entire life for your kids. That's not fair to them. It's not fair to you. And honestly, if they grow up to be parents and they think that they have to live a life built around their kids too, you're just continuing the damage. So I understand that. And all I can tell you, okay, is first off, stop saying I love my kids, but we know you do,
I
okay?
know.
Because
I know.
I can tell you right now, if you didn't love them, you wouldn't be catching their puke in your hands. You love them. We know this. You don't have to preface it. That's the first thing. Second off, okay? Guys and girls and everything in between. I'm telling you right now, I understand that struggle of, but don't good parents do this? Don't good parents do that? Good parents worry about being good parents. So if you're worrying about being a good parent and you're trying to do everything for your kids that you possibly can, you're already a good parent.
Mm.
So stop worrying about being a good parent to your kids and worry about being a good parent to yourself. Okay? Alrighty. So if you like doing something, figure out a way to do it. Make yourself as much of a priority as you possibly can. Okay? You can still prioritize your kids and prioritize yourself. And we're not told that enough. And I am telling you that now. You can prioritize yourself. And if you're like, well, isn't that selfish? Yes, it is selfish. Yeah. But you know what? The way that we act about the word selfish is stupid. It's stupid. Selfish just means you're caring about yourself without worrying about other people. That's literally all it means. Does not mean you're a bad person. Okay? So I completely understand that. I do. And all I can tell you is that your kid knows you love him. Yeah. Okay? He has no question of that. He's not going to question that if you're like, for 15 minutes, I want to sit over here and I want to eat a cookie and I don't want you to ask for one. Or if you do ask for one, I'm going to tell you no. I promise you, he is not going to get to my age and be like, I thought my mom loved me, but then I asked for a cookie. She told me no. Like that's not gonna happen. Okay. Yeah. So I totally get it. And I think if you're gonna take anything away from this episode at all, guys, the word for the day is integration. Okay. Integrate all pieces of yourself, despite what the world is telling you to do instead. The world is telling you instead to segregate. Don't segregate. Integrate. You are a parent. You have ADHD. You are an artist, a creator. You're a worker. You can be all of those things. And the moment that you decide that you're going to honor that and be that, that is when you are truly going to be happiest.
Boom.
No,
boom.
Just kidding.
No, really, like boom. Okay. Arianna, I'm gonna leave it right on that note. That's an excellent note to leave on, unless there is something lingering in your mind based on what we've talked about that you're like, oh, I just got to get this out.
Nope.
No. All right. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
And I will link, your website, your podcast, your social, everything. So anyone interested in getting to know more about you or working with you or buying one of I know you have planners and workbooks and a lot of resources for someone looking for more support. And I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
No, of course. Thank you.
Okay, so I got to talk about that last part for a minute, the part about our kids being our world and not our universe. Since this conversation, I have quoted Arianna on numerous occasions because I just love it so much. It speaks to me. And I think what is so perfect about the way she phrases it is that, when you say something about motherhood out in the world, in social settings, out, in public, I think that the part about saying they are our world still makes all the people who feel uncomfortable about our kids not being enough comfortable. And I really just think it nails what it feels like to be a mom, but to also be a human being with interest, goals, and passions outside of motherhood. And aside from that, I am so intrigued by her thoughts on ADHD one day becoming just another brain type rather than a disorder. And I think if I really sat back and thought about it, there are other disorders that would probably become one of those brain types. But I think what Arianna most wants you to know, and what I certainly took from this conversation, is that there's nothing wrong with you if you have ADHD. You also might not have ADHD just because someone on TikTok rattles off a bunch of symptoms that sound like you from time to time. But if you do, there are people like Arianna out there living it every day, making it more than work, and wanting to share their insight with you. So please, I encourage you to go check out her social media pages and her website. So many great tips, tricks, advice, resources. Check her out. That's it. Don't forget about YouTube. I'll get you next time. Bye. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Sass Says is a production of Luann Nigara, Inc. This podcast is meant to be educational and not meant to replace professional therapy or professional medical attention. To learn more about today's show and what's new in my world, head over to sasssays.com. Thanks so much. Talk later.